On today's episode of Locked On 76ers, Keith and I talk about players that may be on the bubble as the Philadelphia 76ers near training camp. Who will it be? A lot of names. Which ones really stand out of possibly missing the roster? We'll get into it next right here, Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, you are Locked On 76ers. I'm Devon Givens from 97.5 The Fanatic Radio in Philadelphia, alongside my co-host and partner, as always, from the Inquirer.com, Sixers beat writer Keith Pompey. Keith, what's happening?
What's poppin', D? How you been, bro?
Man, all good. No complaints. Getting closer and closer, as we know, here on this Thursday as we talk a little hoops. And before we get started, we got to thank everybody for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. Remember, Locked On 76ers is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, right here, Locked On 76ers. So, Keith, as we get closer and closer to the start of camp and looking at the roster, how deep it is, we've talked about it, where they have a sure 10, possible 12, and then you have to worry about the other 5 roster spots. And we know the 5 players off the bench with DeAnthony Melton, Daniel House, Matisse Thybulle, George Niang, and Montrezl Harrell. Then you go to the next 2 of possibly Paul Reed, Shake Milton, Furkan Korkmaz. Right there, that's a good 15. Trevelin Queen, Isaiah Joe, Charles Bassey, Jaden Springer. There are a lot of names that have been discussed over the past year and, of course, in the offseason that look like this team has a pretty good deep roster, but not everyone is going to make the squad. 17 roster spots overall, as we know. The two-way players that you have in Trevelin Queen and who's the second two-way player? Anyway, they have a little bit of a numbers crunch here. So wanted to ask you, man, as we start things off today, who's on the bubble? There, as I just laid out those 5 sure bench players as of today with the 5 reserves that we talked about. Then you have Reed, Milton, and Korkmaz, I guess. After that, Jaden Springer is a first-round pick, so he's going to be on this roster also. At least a few other names, man. So what are we looking at here? There's a numbers crunch. Who could possibly be on the bubble as we get ready for training camp?
I mean, I think you basically named everyone else besides them. But no, I think if, Trevelin Queen is a guy who could be on the bubble. I mean, who possibly could be on the bubble. Isaiah Joe and also Charles Bassey. I mean, when you look at it, you look at it, the numbers crunch. Like, Charles Bassey right now only has like $74,000 guaranteed. If the Sixers waive him, all they owe this guy is $74,000. Trevelin Queen, if they waive him, all they owe him is like $330,000. Now, if Isaiah Joe gets waived right before the start of the season, they don't owe him anything, right? So from a monetary standpoint, these are guys who you look at it and you say, it's not, I'm not losing a lot of money by NBA standards. Now, a guy like Paul Reed, he's another guy on a non-guaranteed deal, but they like him. They do. I mean, I can see him possibly getting traded or something like that. But, right now, if I'm 2 guys and before heading into the summer league, the 2 guys that I would say who was really in trouble, I would say Isaiah Joe and Charles Bassey, right? Just because of the numbers and because of their contracts. But the way Isaiah Joe played in summer league, I think now it makes them think like, okay, there's really probably going to have to be a competition between him and Trevelin Queen. Now, the only question mark about that with the Trevelin Queen thing is, he's a guy that they signed. Like, they signed him in the offseason, and they hyped it up. Like, we got this guy, the G League MVP. He can knock down some threes. So is it one of those things where do you want to waive him this quickly, or do you want to keep him on? But I have to say that Isaiah Joe has outperformed him in summer league.
So I want to correct myself. It looks like the two-way players are Charlie Brown Jr., who was on the squad last season and spent some time with the Delaware Bluecoats also, and Julian Champagne from St. John's. So those look to be the two.
Yeah.
Champagne? Okay.
Yeah.
Those look to be the two-way players right there. So and that's my bad that I forgot to mention Charlie Brown Jr. because he was around a season ago. So he saw some playing time, and that is another name again, Keith. That is somebody who should be looked at as a guy who may be able to make some strides during training camp and possibly fight for a roster spot of the 17.
Yeah, it could be, but I think that right now, like, if that happens, I mean, because the thing is that means you would have to waive more than two people. You know what I mean? So I think that, from a standpoint where you can say to yourself, okay, we're still going to keep you on a two-way, you basically build playing, because see, the NBA season starts before the G League season. So he can basically, be with the NBA team. And then what happens is if somebody starts to struggle, then you can say, oh, maybe we might want to bring him up if that's the case, right? And then give somebody else a two-way. So I think that from a monetary standpoint, saving money, it might, unfortunately for him, it benefits them to keep him on that two-way right about now.
Yeah, there's going to be some real playoff, training camp battles to see who makes this team when you go as deep as they do with the short 10, and then you figure out the next 7, and one of them being Jaden Springer because they spent a first-round pick on him and still trying to develop and see who he is right now in his young age. Then again, that really leaves you 6, and you have Furkan Korkmaz with guaranteed money. Shake Milton, they picked up his player option, so he's guaranteed money, and then everybody else is basically fighting for a spot. And it seems like they also at least like the idea of Trevelyan Queen and what he does. And as you mentioned, Isaiah Joe had a pretty good summer league, so it might stand that he could once again. In last season, man, he had a really good training camp and preseason, Isaiah Joe, and he was pushing for some minutes, and he got those early minutes. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't keep that job in the rotation. But for the most part, he had a really good start, and maybe he has another really good start to the season for training camp and then preseason going into the regular season where it makes it difficult for them in making this decision. It's going to be really cool to monitor and see how these guys really stack up against one another, fighting for those remaining spots on the roster. Speaking of the Sixers, as we always do here on Locked On 76ers, former 76er Ben Simmons joined former 76er JJ Redick on his podcast. He has some things to say, Keith, about his time here in Philadelphia and so many other things. We'll dive into that next and what it means for him going forward now with the Brooklyn Nets right here, Locked On 76ers.
Before we talk about Ben Simmons, let's talk about BetOnline. BetOnline is your #1 source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player development, team matchup, new podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, with live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Do it today, people. Do it today, especially when you have Thursday night football tonight. Cleveland and Pittsburgh. I don't know about that one, man. It's going to be kind of boring in my opinion. Pittsburgh stinks, seems like. Cleveland, whatever.
Don't sleep on that rivalry, though, man. I remember I went to college in Pittsburgh. And
I know. Dude, I'm not saying the rivalry isn't good. I'm just saying the two teams aren't very good.
Yeah, let me tell you. They're not very good, but I got to share this story. So when I was in college, I went to – it was a playoff game where the Steelers played the Browns. Now, mind you, I went to the regular season game, and it was bananas. So I had to go to the playoff game. I had the ticket, right? So the girl I was dating at the time was like, if if you go to that game, I'm gonna break up with you. And I was like,
What?
yo, she gotta be joking. Like, she's joking, right?
Wait,
She said,
was
no.
she from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, we were students. We were like Pitt students.
Yeah.
So she was like, if you go to that game, I'm gonna break up with you. Man, she ain't breaking up with me, y'all. She ain't breaking up. So after the game, I was like, I gotta go over here, make sure everything's right. She broke up with me, dude. She broke up with me over this game. And like for a while, I was like, wow. But now, like when you think about it years later, it was worth it. It was worth it.
That's right. You landed in the right spot.
It was worth it.
Well,
yeah.
Well, all you did was go to the game. It wasn't like you were rooting for the Cleveland Browns or anything. All right.
I mean, she was a nice girl, but she just
I'm just talking about
like
the fact
it. It was like the next week. So they won that game, and then the next week, I believe that was the second round of playoffs, and because it was the number 1 seed. So then the next week they played the San Diego Chargers at the time and lost that one. So it was like I went to that game. So I was like, hey. So I was like, oh, I got to see these playoff games.
Wait a minute, was she not a sports fan?
She was. I mean, she was on the track team. I mean, she was in sports, but I guess she said that I was too consumed by it. I guess
okay.
All right. Yeah, it's like, I got to go to these games.
Well, you need to go to the game. Look at you now. Keith Pompey from the Inquirer. I mean, come on.
So every time the Steelers play the Cleveland Browns, but I always think about, hey, she really broke up with me for going to the game.
Yeah, all of them going to the game. Absolutely, man. Well, look, should be a good one on Thursday night, and we'll see how that one plays out. Steelers and the Browns. Maybe she's watching the game. Who knows? Thank you for making Locked On 76ers your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you do get your podcast. All right, Keith, man, one of the more discussed former athletes here in town, Carson Wentz. He's one of them. He plays the Philadelphia Eagles this weekend, a first game since he was traded a couple of years back. And now we have this Ben Simmons thing where while he did come back with the Brooklyn Nets, he did not play. He was in the arena. He took all the boos. The Brooklyn Nets won the game, but he never played a game for them a season ago. Right now, it appears that he will do so for the Brooklyn Nets when training camp gets underway next week. He jumped on the JJ Redick podcast and talked about a variety of things, one in which was the fan base and playing in front of Philly fans. And he also mentioned media because he said, Keith, how, JJ was talking about how tough it is to play in Philly, but it was one of the best experiences of his life. And Ben went on to say that, when he would post photos on social media and all, it gets kind of crazy. They want you to consume yourself with basketball, basically. And he put it as such where he said the media would be coming at him if he posts photos of his car or his dog, etc. Something non-basketball related, basically saying, bro, you should be in the gym. I don't remember media members doing that, but I do know that the fans have done that. And yeah, it was a couple of interesting nuggets there coming from that podcast.
Yeah. You know what? The thing is, I just hope that this whole thing just disappears. I mean, well, I know like when Ben goes to media day, there's going to be a lot of questions about this. When Ben plays his first preseason game on October the 3rd, I believe it is, October the 3rd against the 76ers, there's going to be a ton of questions. When he comes to Philadelphia, regular season, tons of questions. But after that, I just hope it goes away. I mean, because it's one of those situations where it's a sad situation, the way everything happened. You talk to people. I mean, right now you look at it. I mean, we want to think about it. Yes, it was last season, but the stuff he's talking about is a year before that and what have you. But there may have been some people who commented on it, but I don't think that those people were people who were there like every day, like you and I, or any of the, you know what I mean? It might have been a fringe guy or a blogger or someone like that. But to me, I'm just ready to move on. I like Ben as a person. I do. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but I like him as a person. I respect him as a person. And, you know, for his growth and for the growth of the 76ers and the fans in Philadelphia, I think it just needs people. Everybody needs to move on.
And I think most of us have, as you know, here on this podcast, the only time we discussed them was when it was time for them to play the Sixers, and we just projected it out to see if it took place that he would be on the floor. It did not happen. And if people notice and listen here on this podcast, and if you're listening for the first time saying, why are you talking about Ben Simmons? It's topical because he's talking about his time with the 76ers for the first time openly in a forum like this on a podcast with someone who's comfortable with, a former teammate in JJ Redick. And that's the only time we bring it up. Otherwise, I know you don't write about him. Yeah. I don't talk about him on the radio show because there's no need to anymore unless something like this happens where he speaks out. And I was a little bit disappointed, though, in some of I've listened to JJ Redick's podcast a lot, and I'm a big fan of what he does there and during the games on ESPN. I am a big fan of what he does. One of my favorite players covering him while he was here. I thought he was tremendous of how he played here during his 2 years with the 76ers. But I thought he let Ben off the hook a couple of times with how he questioned it and didn't, I'm not going to say press it, but if he's comfortable with you, you know, make him answer the question, because he asked him about the thing that we just talked about the fans and the media saying the things about working on in the gym. But he asked him about, do you think a lot of that comes down from you not shooting? And Ben never answered the question. He just went on that whole thing without answering the question. And part of the job is to, if you're going to be in the job, to kind of follow up that question and say, hey, but the outside shooting part now. So we'll see, man. And we'll see how it goes with his season. He talked about a variety of other things. I'm sure people, if not have already listened, you will listen. And at some point we will let this thing go. It won't happen through November, because when they first step on that floor together, it's going to be wild, as we both know. But after that, I'm sure, it will take its step back, its rightful step back of where it needs to be in the background of the Sixers trying to make their push for an NBA Finals appearance. Keith, finally, we've talked about Robert Sarver and his suspension and the $10 million fine. We need to kind of update things on the other side of what it looks like he may or may not be doing as an owner of the Mercury and the Suns. We'll do that next, right here on Locked On 76ers. Keith Pompey, Devon Givens back here on Locked On 76ers. And Keith, the Suns. Well, I'm a big fan of the Suns, but that aside,
I don't know why. You ain't like you don't know anybody on that team. Shit.
I do not.
Come on, brother. You don't know anybody on that team.
I do not know anybody. But one of the things that followed this team for years is the owner, Robert Sarver. Before this investigation, you would always hear stuff about him, whether it was Earl Watson when he was there as a head coach, so many other players. You would hear other media members, people that you may know in basketball, talk about Robert Sarver and how much of a bad owner he was, a terrible owner he was, and it was a bad environment in Phoenix. And it showed on the floor. The product was awful, and just didn't like the whole situation there with Phoenix from afar. And even without knowing anybody on the team now, we don't talk about that stuff. We don't go inside that. We don't even really talk about basketball. We just talk about normal stuff because that's what we've always done. And so I never, mix that here. But just again, knowing from afar about Robert Sarver, hearing about the $10 million fine, the 1 year suspension, and we both, Keith, felt that wasn't enough. That wasn't right, based on everything that happened with Donald Sterling. And here we are now with Robert Sarver. Well, it looks like he's looking into selling the team, Keith, and I think it's on his part the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely the right thing. I mean, we touched base on it a little bit yesterday. It is the right thing to do. It's one of those things where, it looks bad on the league. I mean, it just did. I mean, we talked about this last week, this part, it's a league that says that it's woke. It's down for minorities. It's down for females. It's down for, everyone, right?
Equality.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden this stuff happens, and a year suspension, $10 million for a billionaire. That's crazy. And so yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's one of the things that had to happen. The sad part about this is my man is going to bring in, like, he's going to sell the team for like about $3 million, but they're saying he's going to net, or he's going to bring in make $1 million off of this team, more than he has, as a punishment.
Yeah.
Yo, punish me.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So, but at the same time, it can't stand, man. You just can't. Like, you just destroying your clientele is a bad look for the league. And a lot of times it's one of those things where you say you're going to sell, you decide. It's like somebody retiring, or a coach saying, hey, I'm going to resign from my job. But we all know he probably was about to get fired. You know what I mean? So you wonder if he was actually pushed out, or did he just come out and say, hey, I'm going to do what's right, Yeah,
well, glad to see that is happening. Hope it happens quickly. I know these things take time and all of that, but hopefully it happens quickly, so we can just all move on from this and just focus on the basketball. I mean, it's a good team. Whatever your rooting interest is from afar, though, you watch them and it's a good product finally on the floor. Fun team to watch. They don't need that stuff hovering over them as they play basketball. And look, Chris Paul is out there and having to deal with this for the second time, being in LA with Donald Sterling a few years back when all that stuff really broke the way that it did, Keith. But so yeah, we'll see how it all continues to play out and update everybody once we get more information as it goes along. Keith, got to thank everybody for making Locked On 76ers your first listen every day. You might as well tell the folks about the NBA 50, man, while you're at it.
Yeah.
And alerting people.
Exactly. Like Dee said, thanks for making Locked On 76ers your first listen. Now go make the NBA Top 50 on Locked On NBA your second listen. Which NBA player moves the betting line the most this season? Locked On and the Bet Online odds makers present the NBA Top 50 most valuable players. Find it on Locked On NBA wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. And after you get done doing that, you can get Locked On Sixers wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. And let me tell you this, when you go to YouTube, you click on the Liberty Bell and you become our latest subscriber. And then another thing you need to do is after you listen to this podcast this evening, you have to listen to the Divine Giving Show, right? It is a show that runs every day on 97.5, typically from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Sometimes it's adjustments with the schedule, but you can go there every day on 97.5 FM, 6 to 10 to listen to my man D. He has his own show. Also, do yourself a favor and follow D on Twitter at DivonG975. Follow me on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers. And I'm back in business this week. My first article in a long time is going to be in Sunday's paper online on Inquirer.com. So give that a read and give my man a listen and keep coming back to this podcast.
No doubt about it. We appreciate it, everybody. Thank you so much. And again, make your second listen Locked On NBA, Locked On Experts, covering the biggest stories. There's a bunch going on in the league right now around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you check it out. Keith, we'll catch up tomorrow, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Peace.
Got it.